Thank you all ever so much for joining us. Favourite topic of mine to discuss today, gaming advertising. And absolutely. And we're just going to kick off by getting my panelists to introduce themselves and as well outline some of the key advantages of in-game advertising compared to traditional forms of advertising in the digital age.
Hi, I'm Jamie. I'm Global Head of Gaming and Virtual Experience at PhD Media. We created a gaming-focused division about 2.5 years ago because we thought it was really at the vanguard of opportunity for incremental reach. It was a fresh attention playing field, and it's just from that point grown into this whole cultural opportunity for brands. So for us, it's just a fertile space to engage audiences, reimagine your brand, and just do all manner of things, essentially.
Perfect. Ben.
Hey, my name is Ben Finnegan. I'm head of esports and gaming at Epic Global. We help athletes, rights holders, and brands enter the world of gaming. So that could be like Jesse Lingard. We helped him create his own esports organization, Jailings, or the likes of Virgil van Dijk being a shareholder in an esports org. And then a lot of FMCG brands now who are trying to define their gaming strategy. So for us, you know, probably the simplest way is gaming offers unparalleled access to a Gen Z audience.
Tom. Thank you. I'm Tom Wigley, Chief Digital Data and Technology Officer at Spark Foundry, quite a mouthful. I think there's two advantages that I want to touch on today. One is the absolute massive reach that I think we're going to probably spend quite a bit of time talking about and how that kind of reach has come about. 3 billion gamers globally now. That's more gamers now than in 2018 there were social users. I think we can have a really good discussion about the fact that there was probably more social on a plan in 2018 than there is gaming on a plan right now, which I think needs to change. And then the other really significant advantage that we see is actually the efficiency of gaming as well. So gaming as a platform reaches in the UK roughly 2/3 of the audience that TV does, but it only has less than 1/4 of the media spend per user, which is an absolutely colossal opportunity, obviously, for advertisers to take advantage of.
Mark.
Hi, so I work for Digital Turbine. Digital Turbine's recently bought an in-app SSP and a video ad network, so my job is to sell mobile gaming into agencies and brands, so this is a perfect question for me. I could go on all day, but I'll focus maybe on the one thing that we try and sell or get across in the marketplace at the minute, in that I think that mobile video's probably got mobile gaming's probably got the best mobile video product in the market. It's quite a statement, but we stop the content, we play it to the end, we do it with audio on, and compared to the wider digital video market that barely has, I think it's about a couple of seconds on average of viewing time. About 20% doesn't have audio, and I think only about 14% on screen. So it seems to be almost like a parallel universe that all this money goes into this video format that doesn't deliver like basic stuff like audio, yet we as an industry find it quite challenging to get brands to spend in the space. So that's kind of what I want to get across today.
Interesting. We'll come back to cover some of those points. Natasha.
Hi, Natasha Whitfield-Niven. So I head up programmatic at Bidstack. We focus more on what's now known as intrinsic in-game space. So ads that appear in a sort of mimic real-world environment around football pitches, stadiums, etc. In terms of advantages, so thank you for leaving me to the end when everyone else has listed the bulk of them. I think one of the biggest advantages and exciting opportunities, also a challenge, is the last real space where we're actually able to build an infrastructure and a standard that is truly user-friendly. Ads, traditional ads on desktop, or even when you're watching TV, etc., they're irritating sometimes, and they get in the way, and people are blind. I'm probably going to say controversial things, I apologize. But when you're mimicking a real-world environment and you do it sensibly and unobtrusively, that is a much better user experience.
Perfect. We'll come back to some of those points on user experience shortly. But I wanted to obviously flag that we've been having lots of discussions at ATS so far this week in terms of an increased focus upon attention. How does in-game compare to other channels in terms of capturing and maintaining attention? Tom.
Thank you. So almost before I get into it, everyone here will have heard over the last 12 months a colossal amount about attention. I think it's become such a hot topic in the industry. I think one of the reasons for that actually is gaming. Gaming has done an incredible job of shifting the industry towards attention. I think part of that, we don't want a whole history lesson, but COVID happened, out of home decreased massively. People pivoted towards gaming because of the rise in gaming at the time. And I think through that, people realized actually the attention levels that you get within gaming were absolutely incredible. I mean, from an agency perspective, we see attention levels anywhere between kind of 2 times and 10 times kind of industry averages and benchmarks, which is amazing. Obviously, it varies a lot dependent on the type of in-game advertising that we're talking about. But I think kind of across the board, it's a highly effective attention-grabbing platform.
Absolutely, Mark. What have you got to add in terms of that attention piece?
Yeah, without trying to be too much of a salesman, it was very difficult in these circumstances, but we did actually run tests with Lumen and with Amplified Intelligence on our video format. So that comes out very, very high compared to sort of outstream or social in-feed. So I think we had 22 seconds of attention versus 2 seconds for outstream and 3 seconds for social. So it's quite a big difference there. And with the data from Amplified Intelligence, they're actually able to split where the passive and active attention came from. And it was interesting because quite a lot of the attention comes from mobile gaming has this thing called an end card. So you watch the video and then you have this sort of interactive experience at the end of it. And a lot of the active attention came from that end card bit on top of the people watching the video ad as well. So you get that sort of double whammy effect with gaming or mobile gaming compared to more traditional video formats. Not too salesy?
Not too salesy at all. No. In terms of how the growing popularity of mobile games, esports, the entire gaming sector, how's that influenced the adoption of in-game advertising for brands? Jamie?
I'm not sure it necessarily has. I think there's always been for years now a huge prevalence of game players and gamers and who identify around different genres and titles and competitive gaming environments and esports and streaming. But the opportunity has theoretically been there. There was already enough eyeballs for it to matter and be meaningful. And I think esports kind of went first because it was so similar to sports sponsorship more broadly in terms of mechanics. You already had organizations who were specialists in creating those connections with the sports team or the athletes, the talent between the brand and those ambassadors and those presence. And as a result, it was a logical step. I think it's not necessarily the growth or the further emergence of gaming that's driven this new focus on it as a media and conversation opportunity for brands, but more so just awareness of new formats and platforms and evangelists, salespeople, who are helping brands, agencies, and marketers more broadly understand that, wait a minute, there are eyeballs, there's incremental opportunity, and we have an authentic means of connecting with it. So, I feel that it's more so the infrastructure and the education that's driving increased focus within media and marketing rather than actually growth of gaming.
Interesting. Ben, how are you seeing that from Epic Global?
Well, I'm actually going to go back to a previous job, which was, I was 4 years in Diageo before I joined Epic Global, so I have that kind of brand experience. And there was only one agency in the whole 4 years that I was there that ever presented any idea related to gaming. And the idea was around Fortnite. And, the brand I was working on was Irish focused, so my immediate question is, okay, cool, well, of the 80 million Fortnite players, how many are Irish and above the age of 18, being an alcohol brand? And they weren't able to define that for me at that point in time. So cracking idea, award-winning idea, but we couldn't go with it. So now, from an Epic Global point of view, that's something that we talk to developers about and publishers. We say, well, we can bring a lot more attention to your titles, to your games, if you open up some sort of programmatic advertising, geo-targeted advertising. So in a recent conversation with Ubisoft, they're doing some very exciting things across their titles where, I could be playing a game in Ireland, my friend could be playing a game in the UK, Vancouver, wherever, or even regionally in Ireland, and be served different ads based on their interests. So, they've seen the need, they've seen that there's money to be spent, and they're working that accordingly.
Interesting, and that leads us nicely into the next question in terms of the potential challenges around advertising tied to gaming environments, and in terms of encouraging that ad spend increase. Natasha, what are your thoughts there?
I mean, the most obvious challenge is a lack of infrastructure, standards. We need industry bodies to step up. We need more collaboration from all the businesses that work in the gaming in-game space. I think, every time everybody gets together, there's always at least, 50% of the conversation is, okay, but which in-game are we talking about? Are we talking about intrinsic in-game? Are we talking about audio video? Are we talking about display and menu? And there's so much sort of conversation around what in-game is and what gaming is. And I think we need more environments like this, where you have people from different sides to get together, put the egos to one side and say, okay, what do we actually need for this to function? We need to be able to measure this effectively. To do that, we need standards. We need to, agree around what exactly the different types of game or in-gaming advertising is. And that, we need more support. I think, other emerging formats get a lot more attention than we do at this point in time. Audio, digital out of home, fantastic mediums, yes. But if you're talking scale, as you referenced earlier, gaming is the last great untouched medium. The pure size of the audience that gaming has. I mean, I bought embarrassing maybe, I bought my granddad a PS5 for Christmas a couple of years ago. He's in his late 80s. He asked me for Elden Ring. My granddad. But nobody would ever think that is, what a gamer looks like. So in terms of what we need egos put aside, more collaboration, more support from industry bodies, and more understanding that it is a completely different and new space. You cannot apply traditional metrics and measurement and performance. If you're looking for clicks, it's not going to happen. Because imagine being in that environment and playing a game and being about to score a goal and you've got fat thumbs and all of a sudden you're off. That is an awful brand or user experience that's just going to really negatively impact a brand.
Can I just jump in on that just quickly? Yeah. So I agree 100% with the greater collaboration. I think in particular it's challenging because we're seeing in other areas of media almost the opposite is happening, where we're seeing a massive consolidation. So you look to kind of Google things like their Performance Max products, which are all about, through one interface, tapping into all of their inventory everywhere. And kind of gaming currently is the complete opposite of that, which is lots of different skill sets, lots of different platforms, different conversations to have with different individuals, different measurement approaches. And so, we don't need to go to the other end of the spectrum and try and do what Google are doing, but certainly greater collaboration to work kind of within that kind of the new world in that sense. Yeah,
I sort of don't agree in a way from my bit of gaming, because we're in mobile games, we have standard video formats, standard measurements, viewability, completion rates, audio percentage. We don't really need anything different than digital has in terms of metrics. It's the more in-game formats.
So you've just completely proven my first point.
Huh? No, I don't. Well, I kind of have, but I've also, from our bit, it becomes, when we go into a meeting and go, well, we do in-game, unfortunately, a lot of the connotations from the buyer's perspective, it's proper in-game, like people are actually in the game. We've got formats that sit outside of the game, between gaming levels. It's just more like a TV. It's around the game. It's more of a TV-style format. And those preconceptions actually sort of hurt our ability in our version of in-game to sell more media.
Might be quite an existential question then, but how do we then combat those connotations? How do we essentially rule those out of the conversation so we can just get to the meat and gravy of in-game advertising?
Well, I think if you're just measuring on proper metrics that digital advertisers look for, then that element's ticked, isn't it? It's then how the more in-gaming formats then add in their form of metrics into the mix.
Interesting. Ben, you were looking to jump in.
Yeah, no, I think also the preconception from a lot of brand marketers that gaming is quite a solitary hobby, and that it's just a guy in their parents' basement, no future. because I've seen that from.
I take offence to that.
Yeah, and I do too, because that's a long life gamer. But I've seen it in boardrooms in brands where you try and talk about a certain format on a website, and they're like, yeah, cool. What's the audience? What's the content? Let's do it. You put in gaming, they're like, no, we're not doing gaming. And for whatever preconceptions or ideas that they have. So I think there's a big education job around brand marketers about the size and scale and scope and some of the stuff that you're talking about there. So you kind of have to hit them with the approach that gaming is huge and it's very engaging, but also the hardcore stats that they want to see as well.
Interesting. That leads us nicely into, in terms of, as I said earlier, in terms of combating those preconceptions. What are some successful examples of in-game advertising campaigns to run against that preconception? Jamie, let's start with you.
I think it's sensible to go back 15 years, just generally. And the best
I had hair.
Well, I'm not going to mention that. And it's Barack Obama, 15 years ago, used in-game advertising across, 18 games in Xbox Live to rally the cohort of voters that he was struggling to reach. And I don't want to say it's why he prevailed. Maybe. We didn't have measurement to prove it. But essentially, this shows just how effective the mechanism, the opportunity can be, especially thinking about that this predates, I imagine, all of our interest in gaming as a media opportunity, because it was so fragmented and nascent at that point. And I think that, for me, is emblematic of the willingness of someone to put their entire reputation into the hands of this nascent opportunity because they saw it had disproportionate success potential. And since that point, no one has been as bold since, I don't think.
Interesting. Tom, anyone been as bold since in your eye?
That's a brilliant question. So I think ultimately, what we see across the board, to be honest, is whenever any advertiser is engaging in some sort of in-game advertising, normally it's pretty effective right now because the platform, it's got such great scale and it's so cost effective, like I was saying at the start. I think in particular, we've spoken a lot about preconceptions. One of the preconceptions as well is that it's exclusively a brand platform. Actually, we've done, we do loads of work with a whole variety of different advertisers, but one in particular that stands out in mind is a rail company in the UK, very well known. And over the last year, we've been working with them a lot to drive sales of their rail cards. It's all about, targeting students about to go back to university. It's a very DR-focused activity, but absolutely incredibly effective, way more effective than social. I think the CPA is about a quarter of what any kind of social platform achieves. So, maybe not quite as lofty and impressive overall as the Obama piece, but I think any brand has an applicability within this space, and almost any type of activity should be considered as well.
Perfect. Ben, any interesting campaigns that you'd like to flag?
Yeah, so it sort of moves slightly away from just in-game advertising, but Mondelez for Oreo created their own game on mobile back in 2014, and it was all around the lick, twist, and dunk, or twist, lick, and dunk mechanic, which they were trying to get the ritual across to consumers. But they created a really, really engaging game, which had overall 5 billion dunks of an Oreo into a glass of milk. And it was a really smart way to engage with consumers, get the brand across, give them something to spend their time. They realized that the key decision maker doing the household shopping were female, and this type of game appealed to that audience. But cleverly enough, they also sold advertising space within their game, and they made back double what it cost to actually produce the game.
It's really interesting, and I know you flagged when we had our briefing call in terms of what brands engaging, similar brands in a similar space engaging with advertising within that platform, and how it's a premium environment and it's a good way of showcasing themselves, in the sense that if other brands are choosing to advertise within that platform, where otherwise they may be hesitant, and I thought that was a really, really prominent example of that. In terms of moving to, obviously, Mark, you flagged earlier, in terms of the metrics measures, obviously we've seen and had conversations at ATS about, obviously, the changes in privacy regulations and the loss of mobile IDs, such as Apple's IDFA. How is this affecting the effectiveness of in-game advertising and the ability to target users accurately? And what are the potential implications for brands?
Wow,
and developers?
what a question. I think in-game or gaming, any digital format has the same challenges with device ID. My observation, and it's slightly warped again, but I think it's leveled the playing field a little bit, because in-gaming never had a particularly strong targeting story, contextually probably a little bit weaker than traditional desktop. And I think in a way that it sort of removed quite a lot of the BS targeting stories. You know, I can target 1 million people outside the corner of this building here tomorrow between 3 and 4. Like, a lot of that is going now, and we're returning back to kind of principles of, like, did someone see my video ad, and was the audio on, and all the kind of things that gaming has done quite well in terms of how it delivers its format. So for me, getting back to it, I think that normalization of that world maybe helps us.
Interesting. Tom, how are you seeing it from your angle?
I think it's really interesting because when you look at the rest of the digital industry, it's almost going in the opposite direction, in the sense of, historically, it used to heavily rely on like digital tracking and attribution, and we're now starting to look at things like MMM, regression modeling, to better understand the value of all kind of digital media. And on the flip side, gaming, has always been very strong in brand, and kind of typically you would always recommend, awareness activity, lift studies. And so these two worlds are kind of merging, right? I think it's really easy to think that this is just absolute Armageddon and how we're going to cope with it. But I think the reality is almost every brand we talk to is on a journey when it comes to losing, device IDs. There are plans being worked on. There are ideas around kind of changing in measurement. And a lot of that is really, really positive. And so kind of, if you look at it in a gaming kind of world isolated view, it seems really bad. But actually, I think brands are much more open to that. And it's probably actually more, I think, a concern for developers and publishers than it is for the brands that are kind of operating in that space.
Interesting. And in terms of, that leads us nicely in terms of how gaming advertising is balanced with the gameplay experience. Natasha, what are the best practices to make sure that in-game ads are balanced with gameplay to ensure that seamless experience?
A balance with what, sorry?
What are the best practices for balancing in-game ads to create a seamless user experience?
Making them as native as possible to the environment. And I know I'm probably going to get over there. Talking purely from what we now define as intrinsic in-game advertising, i.e., like I mentioned earlier, ads that sort of mimic real-world environments, which could be, out of home technically, if you're in an open world environment, around the sides of pitches, etc. I think using intelligence when you're applying, performance to a campaign, not allowing clicks if you are in an in-game environment, if you're in a mobile game, not bombarding a user with 20 million different ads. And I know that this is not a pitch, and this is not meant in this way, it's just an example. But for example, when we run our ads in Football Manager, around the edge, we take the same ad and we replicate it. So you're not seeing 20 different tiny little logos and ads, you're seeing, for example, Nike the whole way around, which, again, if you look at sort of standard metrics, that is really, really, really terrible for frequency capping, and that is not going to look great on a report. But for that environment, it works. And it's much neater and it's much tidier. I think when we start working with a new partner, we look very closely at their game. We play the game. It's a very fun part of the job. We think about where we could place the ads that are unobtrusive, that, again, do mimic real life. Doesn't want to go behind the umpire in a tennis match, for example. That's not going to get in people's ways. So yeah, I think being intelligent and conscientious, putting the user first, focusing more, dare I say, on user experience rather than just trying to make as much money as you possibly can. Because as an emerging space, we've already got a lot of battles that we're fighting, and it is an uphill struggle in some ways. So we need to keep it as clean and unobtrusive and user-friendly as possible, because often one strike and you're out, and that's something that we really can't afford, no matter which sort of side of the in-game or gaming space we're in.
100%. Jamie, how are you seeing that from your perspective in terms of getting that balance correct?
Essentially, everyone involved, every stakeholder in the gaming ecosystem is in their best interests not to make it crap, right? Because the mobile game world is not that loyal. Candy Crush, yes, it continues to dominate and huge player base, but casual games are easily dropped and replaced. They follow a massively accelerated trend cycle. So if you overburden someone with multiple ad formats, with rewarded bits, plus in-game native, plus interstitials, they're going to drop the game faster, and you're not monetizing it as well because you have no player base. And again, from the supplier side of this, you don't want to be jostling with other ad formats because you lose kind of that value of opportunity. As an agency and a brand and a decision maker in this, we don't want to have a really scruffy kind of share of voice kind of piece. We don't want to be in and around relatively cheap and dirty old school app advertising pieces. Again, go and download this app with an interstitial. We want this to be premium because, frankly, that's the main objection I tend to get as the first port of call on in-game kind of mobile. It's like, oh, it's not premium. Like, what's premium? You know, and we end up in this whole rabbit hole there, which I think I've almost got my head around, but not in 3.5 minutes. And so ultimately, yeah, it's in everyone's best interests just to make sure it works for the user.
Ben, how are you seeing that in terms of the wider gaming and esports market, in terms of making sure that ads are balanced with user experience?
Well, it's always going to come back to the strategy, and brands need to, if they want to advertise within gaming, figure out what their strategy is going to be and align themselves with titles where the audience they want to attract. Because if they just plaster their brand in every different type of game, it's just going to become wallpaper, and they're not going to activate as well as they could or should. So when we're talking to brands, you know, yes, they're picking up the phone, they're very excited, we want to do something in gaming, but we just asked a simple question, but why do you want to do something in gaming? And what are you trying to achieve? They might heard League of Legends is the biggest esport in the world. Oh, we want to do something there, lots of eyeballs. When we get into the crux of it, actually, maybe that's not the title for you. So critically, you know, what are they trying to achieve? And then they can develop the ads, the experience, the sort of strategy behind that.
Perfect. We're coming close to running out of time, so I just want to finish with one final question to you all. If one thing could change, or one benefit of in-game advertising that you want to flag, I'd say this is the opportunity to make it. Natasha.
Yeah, you first. Going back to the sort of word of the last 2 days, attention, it's one of the only environments where you do have 100% of somebody's attention. If you're watching TV, you're probably thinking, who's that actor? I'm going to go on my phone, you're going to check it, and you lose half the TV show. If you're listening to podcasts, often you're doing very different things. But when you're playing a game, you are in the game, whether that's on your phone, you know, you need two hands, whether it's on a console, whether it's a social thing, you might be chatting to your mates, but you're still 100% invested in what is going on in that screen. Now, we need measurement to catch up to us a little bit on how we can actually report back, but if you apply very simple common sense, it is very clear and obvious that when you are advertising in a game, you have their attention. More so than almost any other medium, I would say.
Mark, key takeaways from you.
Obviously agree with that. That's a good point. I think maybe the most interesting thing to happen to the market from my perspective would be, and it's happened with one advertiser, one of the largest global advertisers, big FMCG, and now they define us as a video channel, not as a gaming channel. So they look at our video in comparison to other video channels. And I would like us to be measured on our metrics and our outcomes rather than a perception around gaming.
Tom.
I'm just going to do a really quick one. Scale of social at pretty much a quarter of the cost. Get involved.
Nice and brief there. Ben.
Hire more gamers. So agency side, brand side, you know, when we do education sessions, we always ask the question, how many of you play games? And there might be one or two hands in the audience. So it's going to be very hard to define what your gaming strategy is going to be, or as an agency, it's going to be very hard for you to sell gaming accurately if you don't have that knowledge base. And gamers are key.
And finally, Jamie.
The term gaming is really reductive. Don't think of it as gaming. Think about what you want to do, who you want to reach, what you want to change. And there's very likely a solution which engages gamers or involves gaming or it connects with esports. Don't just make an assumption about the entire genus of opportunity because of a preconception about what gaming is.
Perfect. Well, hopefully we've given you an idea of the opportunities within in-gamers and the channel. Let's hear it from my wonderful panelists. Thank you.